Hello everybody. Today I want to talk about this anime convention I went to a couple of weeks ago in December because I cannot stop thinking about it, and I originally was going to just make a regular vlog, but after everything that happened, I feel like a vlog just isn't enough. Like I can type out whatever, but like so much happened before, after, and during the convention that I feel like I had to do just like the summary, recap, voiceover, whatever you want to call it. And if you are in the Portland community, the Portland anime community, the Pacific Northwest anime community, you probably know what convention I'm talking about. And that is Kisuucon 2024. It took place the weekend before Christmas, which I don't know, was insane to me right off the bat. Like, I know this was supposed to be a winter holiday, like a winter anime convention, but the weekend before Christmas, girl. So a lot can be said about this convention. If you specifically were in the Discord or are in the Discord for this convention, you know a lot of what went down and a lot of controversies surrounding the convention itself and the host runner, but I don't really want to talk about those because I feel like it's not really my place. There's a lot of hearsay, he said, she said, they said going around about the showrunner. And so I don't really want to talk about that. I just want to talk about like my experience, the outcome, and what we can do better for the Portland anime community, because I love conventions. I love anime conventions. I go to them. I try to go to at least like 3 anime conventions a year. They're fun and they should be fun, and everyone who goes to a convention should have fun, feel safe, feel like they're being heard, not get scammed, and just have a good time. I do want to give like a small, quick, itty bitty disclaimer that I was on staff for this convention, which is actually one of the points I want to talk about that happened during this convention. I was on staff, I was a volunteer, I was one of their head photographers for this convention, but everything I say in this video is of my own opinion. Like, I voluntarily signed up to be their photographer because I met someone at KomoriCon a couple months ago, found the Kisuucon booth, and I was like, wow, this sounds super cool. And so I was talking to whoever was at the booth, and I was like, hey, do y'all have anyone in public relations? Do y'all have a media team? Because I would love to help y'all out. Like, you are a first year anime convention. I would love to be a part of that. I would love to capture that for you. So like, what's your number, basically? And so that's how I became like the photographer for this convention. But like I said, everything I didn't get paid. Everything I say in this video is of my own opinion. I have no connection to the showrunners, so this is all just me, myself, and I here. So the first thing I do want to talk about for this convention is the actual location of this convention. So it was in a hotel, and I have been to my fair share of small hotel anime conventions, and they're fine. You know, they're hotels, they have everything you need. Usually they're surrounded by like accessible food places. But this convention was held at the Holiday Inn Portland International Airport. And if you are from the Portland area, you know that it is not very easy to get to the airport, to get to this area. And it is pretty much a barren landscape, okay? There was like no food within like a walking distance. You either had to leave the convention and drive out, or, you know, Uber something, like Uber Eats something, and which I ended up doing because even though I was on staff, I was not given the option of free food. And the hotel had like a restaurant kind of thing, but hotel restaurants are expensive. They had a concession stand that was open for like 2 hours a day in the very back corner. That was also expensive. Like a can of soda was $4. I was like, and they only took cash, which is ridiculous in my opinion. $4 and cash only, no thank you. So the location of this venue, of this hotel, was just not a very good location. It was very inaccessible. Like for me, I had to take the bus one of the days, and it was about an hour bus and train ride, but where the train and bus lets off, you still have to like cross this very sketchy area. And if you are disabled in a wheelchair or whatever, it's not very easy to get to. Like I talked to some of the volunteers that had to go through that sketchy area, and they're like, yeah, it just didn't feel safe. You know, I have my cane, and it was a big struggle. So location. You always want to make sure it is in an accessible area. There's food in the vicinity, if not in the hotel, then in the area, because no food, very hard to walk to. that's not a good combination. And speaking of food, that was one of the things my wife was personally mad about. Even though she didn't go to the actual convention, she just heard me blab about it at the end of the day. She didn't like the fact that I wasn't being fed by the showrunners, because I also volunteer at Anime Boston for 3 or 4 days, and there they do give us like gift cards to restaurants of our choice, so that way we can eat, so like we're fed. But here I had to DoorDash like 2 or 3 times, at least once a day, so I can eat, because I wasn't given the option of like a comped meal or a pizza party. I think at one point we did do like a food run, so I got like Jimmy John's, but I still had to pay for it. So it's like, you gotta feed your staff. Oh my goodness, I'm so good at segues, because speaking of staff, that was one of like the quote unquote red flags for me on day one. So day one, staff and volunteers show up at 8 in the morning for a meeting. After our general meeting, which wasn't really a meeting at all, they were like, okay, go ahead and sign in so you can get your badge. I go, I'm like, hi, my name is Ann. I'm here for photography. I'm one of the photographers. And they're looking for my name, and they're like, I don't see it here. Did you buy a weekend pass? And I was like, no, I'm staff. I didn't buy a badge. And then the showrunner comes up, because I had personally emailed them as well. And they're like, oh, that's Ann. They're our photographer. They're a staff. Give them a staff badge. So I get my badge. I'm like, okay, that was weird. The next person behind me, who was a volunteer, not a staff member, but a volunteer, same thing. They go up, give their name, and the person doing the signups or check-ins is like, your name is not on here. Did you buy a weekend pass? And they're like, no, I'm a volunteer. I didn't think I had, no one said I had to buy a weekend badge. Turns out there was a difference between staff and volunteer, which makes sense, but this was not explained. So if you were a volunteer, you had to buy a weekend pass, and you just get a sticker that says you are a volunteer. What is that? That did not make any sense to me, because in my head, so this is how Anime Boston works. This is what I know. At Anime Boston, you can sign up to be staff and volunteer, and you get a staff badge, and your admission to the convention is paid for with your services. Essentially, you get a comped badge, you get a staff badge, a volunteer, and you volunteer. During the weekend, if you already attend, so let's say I buy a weekend pass, I buy a day pass, whatever, I'm walking around, I'm like, wow, this is so cool. I want to help out and, be a line guard, whatever. I want to help out during the convention. You can go to a certain area, and they will give you a vest, and now you're a volunteer. But you're only a volunteer for like 2 or 3 hours, right? So that's the difference between a staff and a volunteer for Anime Boston. That's how I assumed it was going to be. Like, if you volunteer ahead of the convention for Kisuucon, your badge was going to be comped. And then during the convention, if you already attend and decide to be a volunteer, then you would get that little sticker. That was not explained. Everybody was so confused. And that was one of the biggest issues with Kisuucon, the lack of communication between everybody, right? I didn't know I was staff. Some people who were volunteers didn't know they had to buy a badge. And as a photographer, I had told them, like, hey, wherever you need me, just put me out there. Like, just tell me where to go. And they're like, okay. During the convention, silence. Nothing. I had a radio and everything. They did not give me any sort of direction. Luckily, I do event photography already, so like I kind of knew what to do and kind of just did my own thing. But some direction would have been nice. And we had another photographer during the weekend who was doing free portraits, and where they put him in the convention was in this back room. It was the special events hall. But the problem with that, the special events room, that's where the maid cafe was all weekend. And if you know anything about maid cafes, they're very secretive. It's an extra paid service. So unless you're paying for the maid cafe, you can't just waltz in and be like, hey, I want my portrait. I'm not here for the maid cafe. Like, you can't do that. And so throughout the weekend, this other photographer was kind of just bopping around the convention trying to find like a good spot to set up, because nobody knew where he was, and he was like really pissed off about it. And I understand, like, this is what he does. This is what he was contracted to do. And another thing for the both of us is all of a sudden we show up and they're like, hey, can you do video? And we're both like, we're not videographers. And the other photographer, he's like, that's not in my contract. And I'm looking at him like, you had a contract? I just emailed this person. Like, damn, okay, professional. But yeah, so like they were asking more than what they originally wanted us to do, and we were just very confused. Now, Kisuucon's biggest problem they had before the convention even started was how the artist alley was handled and how the artists themselves were treated by the showrunners and other staff members who ended up being just friends of the showrunner. So, from my understanding, essentially, about a month and a half before the actual convention started, a lot of the artists that were in the artist alley realized where the location of the artist alley was going to be. And if you've been watching this video, you can clearly see it's not in a very safe location. It's just out in the open, there in the lobby of the hotel. Regular guests who are not part of the convention could just walk past the artist alley. They don't even need a badge, which was another problem, badge checks, but we'll get to that in a little bit if I have time. So the artists realized this, that they're not in a safe location. They pointed it out and they're like, hey, this is a breach of contract, we're not in a safe location, can we do something about this? Can we possibly move the artist alley, like with the exhibitors? Like, can we do something about this? The showrunner did not like how it was brought up and essentially was just like, no, it's fine, like it's in the contract, like you guys are fine, like we're gonna be y'all are gonna be safe. There's a lot of back and forth. At some point, the showrunner starts taking every sort of criticism about the artist alley location very personally, which I think if you are going to be an anime convention or just a convention showrunner, you should not be taking anything personally unless it is a personal attack. But like, criticism of the convention is not a personal attack. And so all that happened. A lot of the artists dropped out because they did not feel safe for their items or in the location. And that's where we started running into more problems. They asked for refunds. And so the showrunner was like, yeah, I'll give you refunds. The convention comes, it goes, still no refunds. It's Christmas time. The showrunner's like, hey, I'm on vacation. It's Christmas time. I will be with you guys in a little bit. About 5 days after Christmas, still no refunds. And so a lot of people are just like, hey, is this a scam? What's happening? Where's my money? I think all of us should be refunded. Someone at one point during the convention in the artist alley does a survey of the artists and is like, what can be done better? Like, what should be done? Like, how do you feel about this con? And a lot of the artists just didn't feel heard. They didn't feel safe. They felt like they were being taken advantage of because they're artists. And they did eventually get their money, I think about a week after Christmas, around New Year's, maybe right after New Year's Day. So they did eventually get their money. But the way everything was handled is just not what you want from a convention, an anime convention, or just any event. As an artist alley, as a guest, as staff, as volunteer, that is not how you handle things. Another problem that I briefly mentioned earlier is badges and badge checks. So as you can see, Artist Alley is in a very open area of the hotel. Literally anyone could just waltz on in and buy stuff from the Artist Alley, which on paper, sounds fine, but a lot of things ended up getting stolen. People felt very unsafe and uncomfortable, and there were even people who weren't doing badge checks for like the exhibitors hall. And so just random people were just going into the exhibitors hall. Like if you bought a day pass, it was a wristband as opposed to an actual badge, but nobody was checking the wristbands. Like I heard so many stories of other people who heard that some people were just hiding their wrist and then just pretending they have a wristband. Like, oh yeah, I got my wristband, and just walking around the convention. Like on a safety level, that is not okay. On an artist alley level, that is not okay as well. Kisuucon 2024 had so many problems, so much so that even while I'm recording this, I feel like I'm missing a lot of other problems, a lot of key details, a lot of context, personal testimonies, because everyone had a very different experience. I, as a staff member, had a very different experience compared to someone who was in the artist alley and saw all of this go down. So I want to end this video by asking the questions: how do we as an anime community do better? How do we hold horrible showrunners accountable? How do we make sure they do better themselves as showrunners? Like, what can we as a community do to come together so this doesn't happen again, or the next time we know what to do and everything goes smoothly? Personally, I think Kisuucon's biggest issue that can very easily be worked out for next year, if there is a next year. Supposedly it was already announced on Instagram, but a lot of people are upset about that. But I think their biggest issue was communication, or a lack thereof. So many of Kisuucon's issues and problems could have been solved if communication was there from the get-go. If they just talked to literally anyone about anything, reached out to people who know how to run a convention, so many things would have been solved. So many things would have gone so much more smoothly. And it's unfortunate that this lack of communication has ended up leaving a bad taste for a lot of people. A lot of people have already said no matter what happens, if the showrunner, the original showrunner, is behind the wheel, they are not going to attend this convention if there's a year two. They no longer trust them. Trust has been broken because of a lack of communication. Which is really unfortunate because despite all of Kisuucon's problems, despite everything that happened, so many people came out and said that they still had a great time, that they had fun. And most of that was because of the community, because of the friends that were there, the people that they got to hang out with, myself included. I was annoyed like half the time, but because of the people I interacted with, I had a great time. And that's what anime conventions should be all about. Being with the community, being with your friends, having a good time, making memories, not worrying about if you're going to get scammed.